Wowee, look at that, we're already back at Pokemon again. I know some people would wonder why I would waste my time and effort on something as minimal as a DLC for a game I didn't like. But damn it, I started this mess and I'm gonna fucking finish it too. If you don't remember my previous video talking about Pokemon Sword and Shield, or you just don't want to sit through a 15-minute video, we came to the conclusion that the game was kind of bad. It was clearly a game that was rushed out while trying to also do a lot of new stuff, resulting in the core content being mediocre and the new stuff being a trash fire, since there wasn't enough time and manpower to flesh it out. It's been about half a year since the game came out, and since then, Nintendo has announced that the game would be diverging from their usual schedule of re-releasing an updated version of the game a year later, and instead they are choosing to do what every other modern video game is doing and releasing a season pass consisting of 2 downloadable content that continues on from your previous save. And as the first trailers were released, my first thoughts were, hey, this seems pretty cool. Too bad it also seems like content that was missing from the base game. Like extra optional areas to explore, new legendaries to capture, oh, and all the previously missing Pokemon! The stuff was genuinely interesting, but it leaves a particularly foul taste whenever you know that you're basically paying $90 for what could finally be considered a full product. But nevertheless, I'm here to review the first of the 2 DLCs, the Isle of Armor. This is an expansion to the base game, with a theme of growth. Admittedly, the second DLC, the Clown Tundra, interested me more because it focused on themes of exploration, but side content with a more narrative focus is just 50% of what was missing from the vanilla version, so it makes sense to try and separate the 2 into different packages so that way people can pick and choose if they choose to do so. Before we talk about the DLC itself though, I should really talk about what has changed since the game's release, since it might alter my original review. Don't worry, this won't be long. For the most part, everything is the same, for better or for worse. The online still functions like ass and brings the frame rate down to a crawl, while offering little to no interactivity between players that isn't hampered by terrible menu icons. There were a few very special raids, but considering how much I hated the raid battles, I hardly consider that a plus. But the biggest notable change is the trade system. In my original review, I complained about how the game lacked a global trade system, and how that made the process of completing the Pokédex an absolute pain. But it turns out that was an intentional decision in order to introduce Pokemon Home, a one-stop online service for Pokemon storage and trading across generations. There's a bit to deconstruct about this new feature, but personally I think it is 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I think it's a step forward because just imagine it. Years later, after Pokemon has gone through so many new generations, we still have a place to keep our favorite Pokemon despite the addition of new video games, as well as potential hardware changes. Previous trade systems no longer end up abandoned since a centralized one exists outside of any singular game. It's a real game changer. Unfortunately though, in order to fully take advantage of the system, you have to pay an annual fee for something that perceivably wouldn't get as much use as something like Nintendo's online service. But what I think really hampers it is just how tedious it is to use. Okay, so here's the process in order to trade a Pokemon on this service. First, get on your Nintendo Switch and get into your Pokemon game to figure out what Pokemon you need. Then open up the Pokemon Home app on your phone. It has to be on your phone because for some ungodly reason the Nintendo Switch version does not have trade integrated into it, meaning that you have to go onto a completely separate device other than the console that you're actually playing the video game on. On your phone, go to the global trade system and then try to find the Pokemon that you need. See what is being offered in exchange for the Pokemon that you desire. Now exit out of your game on the Nintendo Switch and open up Pokemon Home on the Nintendo Switch. This will log you out of your phone because you cannot be logged on to 2 Pokemon Home devices at once. Find the Pokemon you need to trade and transfer it from your save game and into the bank. Now log back onto your phone and finally trade the Pokemon. Now open up Pokemon Home again on your Switch and transfer the Pokemon from the bank into your game. Then open up the game itself. Now that you're in the game, you finally have the Pokemon you needed. Or at least hopefully you do, since somebody could have totally sniped that trade from you while you were going back and forth. Also, if you're doing this to complete your Pokédex, you need to go out of your way to move the Pokemon from your storage, because for some reason it doesn't register in your dex despite you obviously having it. Do you see what I'm getting at here? Do you see how tedious this is compared to opening up the GTS in-game? I can imagine this whole process being updated in later games, but right now it is just awful to use. Anyways, with the new updates out of the way, we can finally talk about the DLC itself. Starting the game after buying the DLC grants you access to the Isle of Armor. This area is adjusted to be around the same level of difficulty as the end of the base game, so feel free to start it after beating the main story. Though it doesn't do much to change how difficult the game is overall, so continue to not expect a challenge from anything this game has to offer. Same deal with the story. If the base game couldn't muster up enough cash to hire an actual story writer to write a compelling story, then you can be damn sure that the side content isn't going to be sporting fucking Casablanca. So, spoilers ahead about a mediocre as hell story. The first thing that happens when starting this DLC is you are introduced to the island rival for your version, which in the case of S.H.I.E.L.D. is Avery, a psychic type trainer. Sword replaces this character in his entirety with a poison type trainer, Clara. What's that? Version exclusive characters that actually somewhat impact the story? Ooh. I didn't think you had it in you, Pokemon, after the disappointment that was Bay and Alistair, and their minimal involvement in the story. So since this is Pokemon, everyone always seems to gravitate towards the most ooh-woo anime cutie, making Clara a clear favorite among fans. But I'll be damned if I actually liked Avery for what he came off as. After mistaking you for a fellow dojo trainee, he invites you to train with him on the island. After easily wiping the floor with him, he suddenly realizes that he has become the rival to a current-gen Pokemon game protagonist, meaning that he's outclassed to the point of absurdity. After that point on, he does everything within his power to impede your progress in the most passive-aggressive ways. It feels like there's a level of self-awareness here that was lacking with any of the other characters in the base game. Like, sure, we absolutely destroyed Hop on like a dozen occasions, but he never acted as pathetically as he's portrayed. This character is carrying over some desperately needed humor that was present in Sun and Moon. Characters acknowledge how weird Avery is or how petty he comes off, and every time he acts like a jerk, it almost immediately gets blown up in his face. But unlike someone like Bede, it doesn't just roll off his back. He's clearly shaken by it. This DLC has a lot of lighthearted characters and moments. Not as much as I would hope, but it is a DLC, so I guess I can't expect too much. There's this dojo master who, upon instructing his students with a banal task, he retreats into the other room to play Nintendo Switch all day. He tells us we're gonna have to perform 3 different trials, and the first one involves some comedically fast slowpoke that skitter around when they run. This story is starting off with some very strong beats. However, from that point on, things slowly get worse and worse. The actual gameplay of performing these tasks is nothing more than fetch quests as an excuse for you to explore the island. The battles of the course are hardly engaging, especially since I'm a champion already and I'm 20 levels higher than anything thrown at me. After the trials are completed, you get this grumpy bear to train. Presumably, this is something that probably should have eaten up time, but since I had a bunch of EXP candies, he reached the appropriate level in less than 30 seconds. By now, we're already over halfway done with the narrative set in place by this DLC, and it amounts to basically nothing. From this point on, the DLC is dedicated to making this little bear into Big Stronk Bear, and I'd assume that it really only matters if the player is actually planning on using them on their team. Otherwise, it's just wasted effort. You choose a type for the bear, and then you evolve it, and then the true villain of the DLC reveals himself. Hop once again shows his face to make your entire experience bland and forgettable. Let us move away from the fun dojo master and instead do some unengaging fetch quests in the forest. One climactic boss fight later, and we've already completed the story of Isle of Armor. After completing it, we're granted access to restricted sparring, which is just a dojo way of saying Battle Tower except with type restrictions. Not much to say about it. If you played Battle Tower, it's just that, except you can only pick one type when going in. I know, it's a Pokemon game, what would I expect? But that doesn't make it any less forgettable and bland of an adventure, excluding the first few moments. But that's okay, because the majority of my time spent in this DLC was not from completing the story, it was from completing the new Pokédex. Along with the island comes a bunch of returning Pokemon, as well as a brand new wild area to explore. And oh my god, this wild area actually has variety! It's got beaches, forests, marshlands, mountains, oceans. This makes the original's variations on wide open grassland look like garbage, which they were. The environmental variety is extremely welcome, but unfortunately the weather system makes its way back in and often makes the area look disgusting when this fucking forest is somehow caught in the middle of a sandstorm. A lot of this place just looks a lot better than the wild area from before, especially the ocean, which looks a lot better than the steel lakes and ponds from the original. This new wild area acts as a sort of combination between the linear routes and the wild area from the original. You can explore around a non-linear island, all while picking up items and collectibles. And unlike the TMs from the base game, this area actually offers valuable TR moves. And along with hunting for items and Pokemon, this DLC offers a very simple challenge in the form of finding hidden Diglets throughout the level, encouraging you to actually comb the environment, and usually keeping up a level in engagement by having you constantly finding new things as you explore. Here's a tip though, don't hunt all of the Diglets. The second to last reward is a lot more valuable than the final one. Unfortunately though, there is one huge flaw to exploring the DLC, and that is the large ocean areas. These parts are huge, but like 80% of the time is just spent in the ocean traveling to the next little island. Just because it takes me a long time to get where I'm going doesn't mean it's engaging. You thought I wouldn't notice, video game, but I did. I know you're tricking me. It's like Wind Waker, except even less to do in between travels. But it isn't all bad. You do have to confront the unique Pokemon behavior of Sharpedo as he barrels towards you. And what's that I see far in the distance? Is that a life-sized Wailord being rendered without me having to be close enough to shove my head up its ass? Ooh, Pokemon, you're actually starting to look like a real video game now. Oh, and after you reach the halfway point in the game, you gain the ability to have your Pokemon follow you around. A feature that was initially introduced in Pokemon Yellow, but made what was probably its most beloved appearance in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Pokemon fans are always asking for this ability because it adds a sense of connection to your virtual partners that you can't get when they're crammed inside of a Pokeball for the entire game. But for some reason, in the game you can only have your Pokemon out while on the Isle of Armor, and nowhere else. What a fucking tease. But I guess it's better than nothing. This entire wild area is a huge step forward in terms of how the system should have been handled. And in a way, it makes me hopeful for a future title that isn't a 2-hour long DLC, but it still has a lot of room for improvement. The last thing to really engage with is catching the returning Pokemon. Completing this dex rewards you with a new charm to pair with the shiny charm. Now, this is probably to be expected, but the new Pokemon I had to catch were significantly easier to collect in their entirety. Most, if not all of these new Pokemon don't require you to manipulate the weather systems in order to see them. And no more 1% hidden encounters like that never-ending story motherfucker Drampa. Pair that up with the new Pokemon home trade system and this catching experience was actually pretty solid. There are also a few smaller features added to allow players the ability to make their Pokemon reach their highest potential. Max Soup makes it to where any Pokemon can achieve their Gigantamax form, and a robot allows you to combine items for rarer ones, including the previous generation Pokeballs with the return of Apricots. Or at least it should. Every time I tried it, I just got common balls. I think you guys are really overestimating the value of these balls. Their practical use is limited when a quick ball can catch most anything instantly, and their collectible use is almost unnoticeable. Lastly, there's a handful of new clothing additions, with a good chunk of it being dedicated to allowing you to look like other in-game characters. There's also more player card styles if you're the one person in the world who gives any kind of a shit about player cards. Hey, what do you know? Pokemon can meet the minimum requirements to be what is considered an engaging video game. Who knew? That pretty much covers the main gameplay of the DLC, and as a whole, I'd describe it as a pretty solid experience. Due to the short nature of DLC in general, it didn't overstay its welcome the same way exploring the base game's wild area did, and with much less surface area to cover, a lot more detail was able to be put into the environment. However, that also means that the content on offer is a lot less fulfilling, and a lack of a compelling narrative makes the actual story-related tasks feel like an obligation. There is some clear padding in several spots of both the story and the level design, clearly intended to artificially make the game seem bigger and longer than it actually is. The Isle of Armor is a completely fine addition to the core gameplay. It's hard to compare a piece of content that is like 1/5 the size of a full game, but I think this DLC offered a lot of improvement already, and is debatably better than anything in the vanilla version. Don't be too shocked though, that's not a very high bar to set. So was it good? Kinda. I'd give it a 5 out of 10. Still nothing I'd say is a must play, but a step in the right direction. Like I said before, I have high hopes for the next DLC since it claims to be a focus on exploration. And that's what this DLC did better than anything else despite it not being its focus. Regardless, it's a perfectly serviceable piece of short content to momentarily increase your playtime. I'll see you all again on the release of the Crown Tundra. A huge thanks to my Patreon supporters: If you like this kind of content, consider supporting me in the future. You get to have your name up at the end of the video, and you get to see art assets used in the video early, as well as the video itself. Thank you.